Welcome to Party Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking a little politics in an exciting week. Kind of a transition week, as it turns out, right? We're transitioning at the federal level between presidents. We're transitioning at the state level. We've got a new speaker. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that, but pretty consequential in both measures. So lots to get into. Let's first talk about Donald Trump's legal woes-ish.
Okay.
They're not exactly the kind of problematic issues they used to be, for one. We've talked about this before, but even as it occurs to the system and Donald Trump's outcomes, it's not the case that a lot of the things that he is said to have done are going to be legally problematic for him. For instance, just days before he's inaugurated to be the next president, Special Counsel Jack Smith from the Justice Department basically filed a report, which was the basis of the prosecution of Donald Trump, saying that he was probably going to get a conviction.
Yep.
So evidence about a pressure campaign on Mike Pence to overturn the election, somehow the January 6th attack on the Capitol, phone calls to Georgia election officials, fake elector schemes, just a myriad of different things.
Yep.
What will be the consequences? It
Zero.
turns out nothing.
Right.
Yeah. Because, and as DOJ policy is, they don't prosecute sitting presidents. So in effect, this will be something that will go away. And there are serious implications to this. Obviously, politically, it's not something that's complicated or problematic for the president, except that people are going to have their own particular grievances about it. But it obviously is also, just historically speaking, pretty unusual to have a presidency starting in this kind of tumultuous time. So what do you make of the kind of report and kind of the whole situation?
Well, in addition to that, New York found him guilty in the New York
business records case. Yeah.
So he has, obviously he's not going to spend any jail time or anything like that, but he has been found guilty. Yeah. So, I mean, it's the role on the first case in regarding these efforts to quote unquote overturn the 2020 election. The Supreme Court play a very important role, saying that presidents have pretty much immunity to do whatever they want during their term. That has a lot of implications, could open Pandora's box for this new term. Yeah. But certainly from an institutional viewpoint, is a new chapter in Americans' political history.
It's a great point. It feels very House of Cards, if you remember the show, right?
The British or the American version?
The American in particular, the darkness of it, but really both, because it's about kind of palace intrigue and kind of who's up, who's down, and what powers you have. There's an assumption, I think, from people that presidents have this kind of, unmitigated power, but that's not always true. Although the Supreme Court, like you mentioned, has really given the president a significant more leeway authoritatively to be able to act. So official acts by the president are much more, let's say, softly pursued from a legal perspective than they used to be. It does put more pressure on Congress to act, and so obviously that means that the president and Congress have to work together. So we're in a kind of new era of kind of presidential power here, and we'll talk more about this as sort of the presidency of Donald Trump unfolds, but this is really an interesting dimension. And to me, like we've talked about before, the fact that this is something that the kind of incoming president faces means that it's just the case that these scandals aren't as impactful as they used to be. People either aren't aware of it, they have seen it and they dismissed it. It's something that happened in the past and it's going to affect their future. So I can imagine lots of ways in which this is true. And so it's interesting to see that we're at this moment where the kind of friction in the system is so high. We'll see how he plays it, right? And this will obviously play into some of the consequences about his nominations, right? There are a lot of people who are on the chopping block here potentially that might not get confirmed, but maybe it's the case that they'll all get confirmed.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Okay.
Really, this week was spent in dusty Senate chambers, Confirmapalooza.
Right.
You have several different nominees who are going to be scrutinized by the Senate. The most impactful probably are two. The first is Pete Hegseth, who's up for Secretary of Defense, and the second is Gabby Tussard, also up for the DNI. So this is a rocky transition, and one that'll happen kind of before you see an official kind of time that Trump's in office. What do you make of the kind of overall outcome here and the questions being asked in the process?
Well, I mean, it's I have no idea.
I don't know what to think.
I mean, the Senate needs a simple majority to confirm it. Right. So Democrats do not play a role in this case unless there's Republicans that are holding on, in terms of who are you going to vote for or against.
Yeah.
To me, yes, Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard are the ones that seem problematic. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem might be problematic. I heard some rumors that all the dogs in the all the canines in
they're barking
the
at their
Senate
owners.
are just very nervous when she goes and testifies. But besides that, I don't think that it's going to be very complicated for her to get support. There might be some issues that, for example, she used the National Guard, South Dakota National Guard to help out at the border, but not within the state. So the issues that might be inconsequential for the job. Pete has huge problems so far, allegations in terms of the role of women in the military, the role of the so-called standards that the Pentagon simply denies all those allegations. So that start with your potential new colleagues is very rocky. And then the issues that he says in terms of being a disruptor, et cetera, without no simple, I guess, outright qualifications of leadership in managing such a big, huge portfolio.
The size of the department in terms of personnel, in terms of financial kind of responsibilities. It's a big place.
It's a lot of money.
Man. And what the Democratic senators are saying is that you've never run anything this big before, and when you did run something, like it was
you run it to the ground.
You basically and you kind of failed at it, and they had to fire you. So that's a definite concern. But people like Jody Ernst, the senator from Iowa, who would have been a pretty prominent critic of Pete Hegseth, it's like they're literally polar opposites. She is a sexual assault survivor. She's a woman in the military. And he has had very pointed views about what women's roles in the military should be. He seems to have softened those a bit. She seems to have softened her opposition, and she said this week she's going to back him. So that momentum really does, I think, play in his favor.
And at the end is, I think, those institutions and all the literature suggests that institutional change moves at a glacial pace. So moving and having significant changes in terms of changing how DOD operates, it's going to be very complicated. It's not only saying that I'm a disruptor and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. It really takes careful analysis of what they can and cannot do in terms of changing real policy that are going to have important consequences.
That's a great point.
So, I mean, he might get confirmed and people are going to hold him accountable. And certainly soon-to-be President Trump is going to hold him accountable in terms of delivering and having these things. And he might have good points in terms of changing some of the culture within the Pentagon, whether it's for good or not. I mean, we will see that. But change is always scary in terms of how institutions perceive that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I think you make a really good point, and that is that these changes aren't just sort of kind of one person's belief. These have to come from a kind of whole organizational change, which is really hard. And in this context, you need both the president and Congress kind of pulling in the same direction to make it happen. And it could take years and years. We don't have that, right?
No.
You have a kind of short-term, reactionary, angry politics about like DEI or about the role of women in the military, maybe the bloatedness of the bureaucracy. Those things are complicated enough to deal with from a political perspective, but then you try to like foist them onto some of these agencies that have been operating in this way for a long time, and it's really hard. So this won't be the last time we see Pete Hegseth in front of the Senate. He'll have to come back and testify when it comes to, you know, the kind of routine process. Yeah, and so this will be a kind of ongoing thing. But I think you're right that this is going to be a lot harder than they think it is. Or maybe it doesn't matter. And maybe just the kind of inference of it, maybe the politics of it is enough to say, like, we're going to try this and we're going to say that we did it or, you know, make a case that we basically have it done. And then it maybe doesn't actually happen, but it doesn't really have to happen because people will believe that they've tried to do something. So the optics of this really matter.
And in terms of, I guess, diversity, I think that in terms of when you look at population growth, when you look at the groups that are growing in terms of population across the country, it's like, well, you kind of need some diversity.
And you look at the rank and file of military.
Mean, just because population growth, the people that you're going to be recruiting from are from diverse groups. So if you need to keep the base growing, right, and that's just, you know, normal, active military personnel, you need to be going to that particular pool. So if you're not doing that, then that also poses a national security issue.
Now, we could talk a lot about individual issues here. Obviously, Hegseth has got a bunch. Galbardt's got a bunch. And we'll see Pam Bondi with some tough questions about her role as AG in Florida. But, like, I want to talk about the bigger question here, and that's whether or not these hearings still serve as a legitimate check on presidential power.
No.
Right? That's it. Yeah. End of show. Roll the credits. Like, that is the biggest issue for me, is that now this is just kind of kabuki theater. It's just a way for, you know, Republicans and sort of to present their best case, Democrats to, you know, rattle off their, concerns. They hold up big, you know, banners and you know, Tammy Duckworth had this sort of soldier's creed, you know, kind of, little poster. It's not really doing anything, right?
No.
We're not really vetting these candidates in a way, and that's a symptom of how these kind of scandals don't matter as much anymore.
Absolutely.
And how accountability is lost. So we're seeing it in politics, yes, but we're also seeing it now as an administrative matter where we really need the Senate to do its job here. They really have to vet this because, like, our enemies are watching. They're looking at this just like we are. So something has to get done. And my fear is that we aren't serving as a clear check on the executive.
Absolutely. And the type of questions, for example, when we look at Hegseth and other confirmation hearings, at least at the committee level, it's, you know, you said this about that and this. Okay, sure. But, like, that is not telling me if the person knows or understand how budgets work. Does the person understand how a cost center works? Does the person understand how, you know, getting a contract with X, Y, or Z works? What about HR policies? Do you know how the money of DOD, if it's invested, not invested, partnerships, this and that? Like, the real question.
And that's like your morning job, right? Then you have afternoon and evening, right? Which has other kinds of complications. So, yeah, again, without getting into every detail about the way that, you know, these operations work and the agencies function, I'm just concerned about the big picture, which is that we no longer see these sort of institutional checks as we used to. So for the Senate, which was supposed to be advise and consent, it's mostly consent and less advise. And that's a real liability for a system that needs to have this built into it.
And the argument has been completely destroyed because the argument now is like, well, we think that the president should have the team that he or she wants. And it's on both sides of the aisle. It's both Democrats and Republicans. And you said, okay, but loyalty versus expertise. I don't know.
It's the age-old trade-off, right? That like presidents try to manage as best they can, and it's getting harder to do when you've got political payoffs and you have to kind of please bases, and there's all kinds of different politics surrounding it now. So we need this check more than ever. So we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, lots of people to confirm, and the Republicans have got the numbers. So definitely, I don't think you're going to see too much by way of denials here, which could be a real problem for the Trump administration incoming. They've pretty much got their ducks in a row, and I think we're going to see him more or less marching to the pond. So yeah, we'll keep attentiveness to this. But let's switch and talk about Texas, because there's a lot going on in the Lone Star State. The two big things are that the budget total cap has been set by the comptroller, and the second is that we've got a new speaker. Let's talk about budgets first, because that's going to dictate how happy or sad a lot of members are at the end of this. The Texas Constitution limits how much the budget can be through various mechanisms. What the comptroller said, who gets to put this in, is that they've got basically about $194 billion and a little over $20 billion to sort of surplus to spend. The rainy day fund has got about $20 billion in it, which is a record high. That number keeps rocketing forward. That can only be used for certain kinds of things unless they vote otherwise, which they almost never do. So the good news is, just to sort of put us in a nutshell, is that this is a pretty healthy budget for Texas. The bad news is that actually it's odd that members tell me that it's harder to make choices when you have more money, right? Because everybody wants a piece of it. And you have to say no more. If it's lean budgets, people can say, well, there's just no money for that. Sorry, and people don't even ask. But as it is now, there's a lot of money available. So I guess the question is this going to be spent on sort of every priority or a fixed few number of priorities? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, you have to define priorities.
Okay, yeah. So I mean leadership priorities.
Leadership priorities.
Those setting the agenda, especially Greg Abbott. Now, Dan Patrick came out after, like, minutes after this was released and said, okay, here's my plan for the money, right? Like, you get a lottery win, you're like, okay, here's what I'm going to spend it on, right? So he wants to spend it mostly on tax cuts, which is something that has been in the Republican circles for a long time. But he also says he wants to spend it on teacher pay and having sort of more hardening of the grid, basically more energy production. So that's a reasonable, I think, outcome for the money that's there. But is that going to happen?
Well, I mean, to me, we need to focus on two big, huge priorities in terms of infrastructure. The first one is water, and the second one is power. So every time that they mention the grid, it
sounds like a Minecraft, like, we need water and power.
Exactly. I mean, yes. As you know, the city of Houston is facing a crisis.
Yes.
Now we need $15 billion to fix our water infrastructure. Some projections should suggest that by 2030, we ain't going to have water or we're going to have shortages. So the time is now, and we have this surplus. And this surplus needs to be invested in things in capital projects, meaning, once again, water infrastructure, because it's not only Houston, it's West Texas and East Texas and the Panhandle and South Texas, everywhere, and the power grid. You cannot operate a state bringing more business, being business friendly, so on and so forth, without power and without water.
So true. I mean, the estimates suggest that we need basically about $154 billion in investment in water in order to make things happen. And they will. I think that money is there, but more likely what they'll do is probably have a special allocation and then kind of skim off the top of the rainy day fund. Now, voters already approved basically a way to fund a water bill or fund a water fund that does fund projects, but most people say, like, it's not enough. They need more. And
it is not enough.
that's what the problem is. Like, even the money that they have now, which seems flush, is not enough money to fix all these problems. So that's again where the priorities come into play. So let's segue to the governor's priorities and lieutenant governor's priorities. They say that they want to do school vouchers, right? Which could have a fiscal note that reaches into the billions every year. Where's the revenue going to come from? The surplus is positive right now, and the rainy day fund is flush, but that's not going to last forever.
No.
So the question is, where's the money going to come from?
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea because that is a huge problem. And especially when you see the context of things. If you had the infrastructure to attract business over and over and over and over and over and keep growing, then say, okay, we're going to have a very solid revenue.
Yeah.
But if you start having problems in terms of water or regarding power, then businesses are going to say, oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love your policies. I love Longhorns, Blue Bonnets, barbecue, so on and so forth.
Aggies, right?
But
yeah. No, that's right. And I think that's the real problem. And so, there's about a 9% growth in sales taxes, which is a indication that the state's growing. More people are here.
Correct.
More people are spending money here. That's a plus. That's what the state needs in terms of generating that money.
But then more people means more water
more
and
demand,
more power.
Yeah, more demand for water and power. Yeah, so you got to build your Minecraft village in a way that doesn't grow too fast, but also has resources to be able to grow when you need it. So this is the crisis.
Right. So in terms of vouchers, the question is not if it's going to pass. I think it's going to pass. Yeah. The question is how and how, the enchilada is going to look like. Mm-hmm. What are you going to put into it that members are going to say, okay, I'll eat it?
I like a really messy enchilada. I'm going to be honest with you. I like all the stuff on it.
Oh, no, me too.
Let's just get into it.
But
that's the way it's going to look.
That's going to be.
Right.
Because then you're going to have it's too hot, or I don't like beans, or I don't like these. Right. And then
the cheese isn't melted enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, lots of potential problems. But the good news is there's money. And so that's something that they can do. I mean, we didn't talk about the tax cuts, right? Property tax reform has been something that has been expensive. Yeah. They spent $18 billion last session to fix things. Most people still look at their tax bill and say it's too high. Yeah. That's going to be another kind of potential, big money item. So they're going to have to follow this out. But let's talk about the personnel, which is really what we've been waiting to do for 6 months at least, almost a year, because we've seen this moment coming. The ancient Greeks have designations for different plays. Okay. Right? So this being a classically trained, Ivy League educated academic. The Greeks have basically plays that are either satire, they're tragedies, or they're comedies. The Texas legislature fight over whose speaker is all three. Right? You had the following things. You had concerns about billionaires astroturfing the Texans with $50 tweets. You had the lieutenant governor claiming that the former speakers were part of a Goodfellas style mafia that was looking to take advantage of the members. You have one member filing a criminal complaint against his own party's chair, just all of the drama, all of the comedy. At the end of the day, we have a new speaker now, Dustin Burrows from Lubbock, rebuffed a far-right challenge that we've talked about a bunch of times. 85 to 55, 9 people voting present but not voting. What do you make of the outcome here? Pretty stunning in a way.
It is pretty stunning. Especially with all, I would say, the anticipation that was built on the other side in terms of we have the numbers, and at the end is
we didn't
quite.
get what they wanted.
I mean, he won with a minority of Republicans supporting him. Institutionally speaking, without looking at political parties or ideologies or anything like that, I think it's positive for the institution. Because if we follow our own democratic processes, every member has a right to represent their district, and every member has a right to lobby for their constituents. So I think that's important in terms of our substantive beliefs in terms of democratic processes. What's going to be the outcome? I have no idea.
There'll be serious implications. I mean, the Abraham George, the chair of the party, came out and said that, we're going to primary people who didn't support them. Some of these folks are in jeopardy. Now, we've seen some of them survive primary challengers, right? So they're not that worried, maybe. But some of them could be. Caroline Faraday, who's a freshman member, she's going to she switched her vote to Burrows. She's from West Texas, so she said, this is good for our community.
Right.
She's going to get a primary. Her father is one of the prominent donors in the Republican Party, so she's probably going to be okay. Lacey Hull from Houston here, she also voted with Burrows and was one of the people who nominated him, and that's going to be a problem for her. We actually speculated off camera about this, that she spent a lot of money in the last cycle thinking this exact problem was coming. So they've seen this issue coming for a while. How they'll hold the line, we don't know. But certainly it's going to be the case that a few things are going to happen. Number one, Phelan is still going to be the enemy, right? The kind of, let's say, like the swamp that the conservatives say happens in Austin is certainly going to be still a talking point. In fact, Greg Bonin, when he introduced Burrows, made a slip and said the next speaker, Dennis Bonin. And people have said that Dennis Bonin, former speaker, was the kind of architect behind some of this. Well, that's not going to quell that. So that'll be an issue. We're going to see friction between House and Senate, no question. Right? Dan Patrick came out almost immediately and said, like, you have done the wrong thing here. You've bowed to Democrats, basically, who've, more of them voted for Burrows than Republicans voted for Burrows. So that's going to be certainly a talking point and will have implications to what happens in the session. Will there be Democratic chairs? They didn't vote on rules yet. They usually do that the same day, but tensions are too high. Everyone needed a breather, so they didn't do that. They may very well, though. So we'll see how that plays out. That could be an issue, but I'm not convinced, honestly. They promised us like busloads, 18 busloads of people. The Republicans said were coming to sort of support this. Not that many people came. Maybe 50 people, maybe 70 people came. I just don't think that the Republicans are going to care that much in 2 years who was voted for speaker if the session turns out to be conservative.
Well, and also, remember, Burrows is pro school vouchers.
Yeah. So, he's very conservative. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, is that the way to appease, for example, Governor Abbott and said, like, okay, and then Abbott exerting his great political pressure away from the issue?
Yeah.
Maybe. Are we going to have a City Death Star Bill 2.0?
Yeah, which he was the author of. Right. Extremely conservative bill that every conservative wanted.
Right. So, I mean, it's up in the air. The only thing that I think is up in the air more logically is the role that Democrats are going to play.
Yeah.
And how much leeway they're going to have.
What do you think is going to happen there?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they're going to get chairs or not. I mean, who knows?
My hunch is to say no, but they very well could. I don't think it'll be like a significant role, but they'll have some input, which is really what they wanted. They wanted to protect the chamber. That's why they voted with Burrows, and many of them on the very first ballot supported him. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, but that's something that we're going to keep an eye on it on the next at least 140 days coming. So that's it for today. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.